Let's talk about rust on Evos. If you follow my channel long enough, you know this black one. This is a Texas car, clean, really no rust on it. Silver one, Wisconsin car, about as rusty as it gets. So if you're looking to see where your Evo might be hiding rust, you come to the right place. Let's take a look. So if you are familiar with the DSM days, a lot of times you'd look for rust in the strut towers in the front. That's a very common spot where they would end up rusting out, and that's where you would look to see, if the car was still in pretty good shape or not. And I have to say that that's not much of an issue, at least that on this car. And since this car is super rusty in general, I kind of feel like it's not a common thing actually on the Evos. You don't really deal with a lot of strut tower rust. That's not, the big issue. I did clean this up once already and cleaned up some of the rust, and then you can see it's coming through. But this honestly isn't that bad. It doesn't really bother me. This strut tower rust, it's livable. The main area where you're gonna run into rust on an Evo that I would want to watch for is in the rear. So the rear quarter panels and underneath the rear chassis legs, as you call them, is kind of where you really want to watch for rust. As you can see this beauty here, how bubbly that baby's getting. That is just awful. And honestly, other than the looks part of it, this part doesn't really bother me so much because it's still functional. It doesn't really affect anything as far as the stability of the car and how the car would actually hold together. What we're going to show you in a second is what actually is really bad. So you can see here, it's kind of the common spots where it's going to bubble. We'll take a look and make sure there's really nothing. There's maybe it's hard to see in there, but it's pretty solid in here. I mean, that's one spot I would check up in here, and then the rear chassis legs. So we're gonna go underneath. If I was looking for rust on an Evo, the first thing I'd be doing is looking underneath like this, and I would look at what they call the rear chassis legs, which is this part right here, up here. That's where I'd be looking. Where the rear suspension components connect to the car, that's what I'd be looking at. I'd want to look for rust in those areas. Right up in here. Because that is, a pretty structural part of the car. You want to make sure it looks good. And like I said, this is a clean car. This car, really no rust to speak of. So that's nice. Very good. And, rust on other things is, minor spots. This doesn't really actually look too rusty. Hard to zoom in there. But areas like that I'm not, concerned with. My biggest concern is the chassis part of the car. And you're going to see now just how bad this can actually look. And if you follow me long enough, if you saw my gas tank video, you know how bad this can get. Let's see. This side is actually the better side in here. Doesn't look too bad. I'm pretty sure this other side's got a straight up hole in it. Let's see. Yeah. So it's straight up got a hole in it, a rust hole. And again, that part too doesn't even bother me that much. What really bothers me, and what you gotta watch for, is the rear chassis legs. And this still doesn't look too bad because you're not seeing the holes. There's the hole. Look at that. She's a beaut. There's a lot of rust up in here. I might splice in some footage of me showing this stuff before, but hopefully you can kind of see. There it is. This is pretty much rotted out. So there's really not a whole lot of support. If you got rear-ended, I think this car would crumple up pretty quick. And more concerning than that is actually where the chassis mounts, or the rear suspension mounts to those pieces. Again, tough to show you right now, but up in here, right around this area, that's where I would be looking. If I'm looking for rust, look where those rear suspension components connect. you're going to be able to take a better look. If you're actually looking at buying an Evo and looking at the rust, you're going to be able to take a probably better look than I can even show you right now. But hopefully, this kind of gives you a feel for where to look. Typically, you're going to have other stuff here in the way. You're not going to be able to see this so well, most likely. So you're going to have to really get your head up in here and look around a little bit to actually see this a little bit better. So just be forewarned. But sometimes even simple things like this is a good clue, obviously, that you might have more severe rust in other places. So, you know, this Evo, I kind of saved it in some ways. Obviously not fully yet, because this stuff, these rear chassis legs should be replaced, really. But that's a big job. But that's how rusty this Evo is, and this Evo is running down the road. I can't think of much else. Maybe we'll pop the trunk here. There's obviously a little bit of rust even up here. There's rust in the door sill. Not so much rust there. Typical spot for rust. This is actually one of the things I should point out. This is, I think, even where it was a little rusty on my black car. This is a very common rust spot. The brackets in here or whatever, it ends up holding water. And the brackets in the wing and stuff just end up rusting out this part. That's very, very common on the Evos. You see the rust up there a lot. And I'll probably cut in some a better shot of this, because if I can find it. But the back bumper here, this back tail pan, if you will, is actually pretty rusty. Here you go. You can see it. Even from here, you can see how rusty that is. Of course, if you were looking at Evo, they're probably going to have a bunch of plastic pieces in here to cover up all this rust. Because typically you're not all stripped out like I am on here. But another thing I guess to note is really the rear strut towers even aren't bad here. Which is funny, because I did have an Evo once that had some surface rust back here, and it wasn't really a rusty car, but it had some surface rust back here. And I've never touched this one. I've never done anything back here as far as trying to even just cover it up a little bit. So strut tower rust's not really an issue on the Evos, at least as far as I've seen. Of course, if you watch my videos long enough, you know, leave a comment. Let me know where you found rust on your Evo, or where you think people should be looking. But the rear chassis legs are a big one for me. That's kind of the main thing that I'd be looking for. This is the big hole. This is the foam from the rear bumper. And then you can see right down in here too. So that's it. That's basically the rustiest Evo in the world. I can compare it to my black Evo. You can take a look at trunk in there. Of course, no rust down in the door sills here. And what's funny about these seats is I took these seats out of that silver car and I painted these, but they're already getting rusty again. Obviously I didn't do a good enough job of cleaning up the rails, but these seats came out of that car, and that's why they look rusty, even though this car's not really rusty. So this is more of what you'd probably see. You'd probably have this plastic covering, even more stuff on the floor. And I guess technically you can see this is kind of rusty on this one even, but nothing too concerning. It's all solid. Won't hurt to treat it someday, but not bad. And of course you go down here on this one and there's no big old rust holes, so that's good. Struts, let's see. I think I might have sprayed these struts once just to make them look pretty. I'm not sure. They look like they're a different color. Either way, it's not obviously really rusty, so I wouldn't be concerned about strut tower rust necessarily on an Evo, but again, just my opinion. All this looks pretty clean. Would be cleaner if I took that stuff out. And yeah, I mentioned up in here, I don't really remember if this had a sign of that rust before. This car was completely repainted once, so that helps, of course, too. But again, Texas car, And that's what really helps, not driving it in the salt in the winter. That's what makes all the difference. We'll go under the hood of this one just because it looks way nicer. Look at that. So, no real rust issues, of course, here. Oh, but you know what I did think of? And I don't know if I'll be able to show it very well. Underneath this fender, basically underneath this fender, is another spot that's going to hold water and get rusty. And I noticed that for sure on the silver car. And we're not going to probably be able to see it here, but this, because I have the fender liners in here, even though they like to, you'd have to pop them out to really see. But if you pop these fender liners out and you looked up here, you'll see a rusty car if it's really rusty. Again, not as much of an area that I'm super worried about structurally. And unfortunately, I didn't take these out. But maybe, if I have video of it, I might add it to this and overlay it. But basically, if you took this fender off, you'd see a lot of rust up in here. Or if you took this fender liner out and looked above this fender liner, you'd see a bunch of rust up there too. So that's another spot I'd look for rust. And then finally, hopefully you watched my video on the front subframe or whatever. I can't remember right now what it was called, but I had this one replaced under warranty. So that whole front cross member was replaced. That's of course another spot I would watch for rust. That's a safety recall item that you can get replaced under warranty if it's rusty enough. So that's definitely a place I would look out for. And for mine, they replaced the whole lower control arms and everything. So that was very cool. This piece can also, and has gotten rusted out actually. This is off my black car. This one specifically, because the one that was on here was so rusted it wasn't really doing a whole lot. Another area where you can see I did my best to cover it up, but definitely still rusty on this lower radiator support. So you could always check there. And of course, as I generally do this shot, you can see down by the body pinch here, trying to focus on it, you can see how along that area where the whole body pinch is, it's definitely rusted out. And even in the back seat of this one, if you pull up the carpet in the back seat, you can see some rust spots as well. This right here is actually the carpet. Let's see, focus. Yeah, that's the carpet inside. So, you know, you thought your Evo was rusty. You ain't seen nothing. I don't think too many of them are going to be worse than this one, but hopefully it can give you an idea for what to look for. Underneath. And just how bad it can get and still be drivable. You know, I might play devil's advocate here, and I know people hate rusted cars, but I mean, look how bad this one is, and it's still on the road. I'm not saying I'm super confident in it all the time, mainly because of the rear chassis leg rust, but some of this rust, you know, if the rear chassis legs were replaced on this car, I'd be totally confident in it. I'm not worried about, you know, my feet falling through and doing a Fred Flintstone or something. Let's take a look under this one on the same side. And now you can see actually a little bit. Get my finger out of the way. A little bit of rust. So I guess that's definitely a good spot to look for. And again, this is solid. This is clean. So I mean, to me, it's still pretty damn clean. Something like this definitely wouldn't deter me from buying a car, but to each their own. If you don't think that's clean, if you think that's a lot of rust, I guess that's your opinion. You can have that opinion and not buy that car if you want it, but for basically a 20-year-old car, it's nothing. It's good, solid, in my opinion. so hopefully that covers everything. The best spots I would look, again, the main thing for me would be those rear chassis legs. So if you were going to buy an Evo and you're worried about rust, or more importantly, actually if you are looking at one online, because that's what you're probably doing, you're probably looking at a car online, and if you're worried about being rusty at all, have them send you photos underneath of the rear chassis legs, or have them do a video like I did where they just poke a camera underneath and you take a look. You could even pull this wheel off and take a look if you're really serious about it, and if the potential seller would let you do that. Pull the wheel off, really take a look inside there, see what that rust looks like. Obviously, if you have signs like this on the outside of your Evo, you know there's more going on, unless it's already been fixed once underneath the Evo. Also, this is a whole nother area too, actually, where mine is rusty. I can show you that. Not a bad area to look at either. I don't remember if this pops. So, check in there. That's where it could rust as well. But that's it, guys. Hopefully you found this informative. Hopefully and you know a little bit more about where to look for rust. And if nothing else, hopefully the Silver Evo makes you feel really good about yours not being super rusty. But leave your comments in the comment section. Let me know what you think. If you have a rustier Evo than mine, I feel really, really bad for you. But otherwise, as always, Paul from Boosted Films, saying thanks so much for watching.